When her family became the target of a racist act, she decided to fight back. But what she did next shocked even the person responsible. You won't believe what happened, but let's start from the very beginning. Tamara stood on the porch of her new home, taking a deep breath of the morning air. This was her first own house, a dream she had built over many years. A sense of pride overwhelmed her as she looked at the large, bright windows and the freshly painted walls. At that moment, her daughter, Keisha, still a schoolgirl, stood beside her, unable to hide her excitement. "Mom, it's so beautiful here. Are we going to live here forever?" she asked, gazing at the green yard. Tamara smiled, but there was wariness in her eyes. She knew that this place had once been the arena for those who would not want to see them here, in this neighborhood. But she was ready to fight. All she needed was time to prove that she and her family deserved to be here. But the next day, when they returned home from work and school, their joy was immediately shattered. Graffiti covered the walls of the house. The offensive words, clearly drawn with the intent to humiliate, stood in stark contrast to the purity of the surrounding neighborhood. "Black people, go home. You don't belong here." The inscriptions on the house were a blow below the belt. Tamara stood before the wall, unable to believe her eyes. "This can't be true," she whispered softly, feeling her heart tighten with pain. At first she didn't know what to do, but her inner voice wouldn't let her rest. This aggression couldn't go unanswered. She called the police, but as expected, the officer who arrived at the scene wasn't particularly interested. He noticed the insults on the walls, but didn't offer anything concrete. "We can't do much if there are no witnesses," he said, flipping through his notebook. "Do any of your neighbors know anything?" Neighbors, thought Tamara. But judging by the officer's reaction, her family might not be the most popular in this neighborhood. Tamara couldn't just give up. She took several photos and posted them on social media, along with a post describing what had happened. The reaction was immediate. Comments started pouring in, but not all of them were supportive. Some wrote, "Not here." Some said, "We need to get rid of these people." But among the angry words, Tamara noticed one. "I saw who did this." She immediately reached out to this person and arranged to meet him. The man, named Jim, appeared perfectly peaceful, with a retro-style hairstyle and beard that matched his artistic persona. He said he had seen one of the neighbors leave these graffiti. But his reaction wasn't all that surprising. As it turned out, he was a local artist who lived 2 blocks away. He spoke of his dislike for the new neighbors, who, in his opinion, didn't belong in this beautiful neighborhood. "It's just an expression of discontent, nothing personal," he said with a smile, not understanding the seriousness of the situation. "We all want this place to be better, right? By the way, what kind of family is that, if you don't mind me asking?" Tamara felt her blood boil, but before saying anything, she took a step back. She could have accused him right away, but she knew she needed more proof to be sure. Still, something about his calmness unsettled her. She understood. If Jim was behind this, she would fight to the end. After meeting Jim, Tamara knew he was involved in the graffiti and wasted no time. She went home and began searching for evidence, and found it. Hidden among the other spray-painted words, she discovered symbols Jim often used in his artwork. She was certain this wasn't a coincidence. The next day, Tamara went back to Jim's house, but this time with her daughter, Keisha. Despite her mother's wish to handle things alone, Keisha insisted on coming along. Quiet but determined, she was ready to face the situation. Jim opened the door with false friendliness. "Oh, it's you again?" he said, almost mockingly. "Why don't we just forget about this?" But Tamara stood firm. "You painted on my house. I have proof, and I'm going to deal with this. I'm sure these are your works." Jim froze for a moment, then blushed. "This isn't what you think. He stopped, unsure of how to explain. "It wasn't me." Her silence spoke louder than words. Realizing he couldn't talk his way out of it, Jim understood the gravity of the situation. Tamara calmly said, "You have 2 options, Jim. Either admit it, or I'll make sure everyone knows." She left without waiting for a response. That same day, She posted a video of their conversation online. Jim quickly became the topic of conversation on all local platforms. Accusations poured in from all sides. Tamara wasn't content with just the internet. She went to a local bar where Jim often visited. As soon as she entered, all conversation stopped. People who might have been her allies now avoided eye contact. "Did you hear what Jim did?" whispered a woman behind the counter, not looking at Tamara. "We saw it," Tamara replied, her voice laced with anger. "He just didn't know who he was messing with." At home, Tamara checked her computer. Her posts were gaining traction. Strangers, many of whom didn't even know her personally, began offering support. But with every like and comment came questions. Why didn't anyone speak up before? And what other secrets are hidden in these houses? Meanwhile, Jim continued to hide from public judgment. His attempts to justify himself became increasingly less convincing. He began threatening Tamara and even posted on social media that he would never deal with these people again. But his words only strengthened the resistance. A battle for public opinion had begun, and Tamara felt she had just taken the first step toward victory. With each passing day, the situation grew more tense. Local authorities and many neighbors began defending Jim. His justifications about freedom of expression sounded convincing to those who refused to acknowledge the racism involved. The mayor suggested holding a meeting where locals could discuss the issue, which only fueled Tamara's frustration. Determined not to wait passively, Tamara took action. She organized a meeting with activists and neighbors to share what had happened. With their help, she arranged an anti-racism rally that not only caught the attention of local residents, but also made headlines in the local media. But the response was more threats. Offensive graffiti appeared on her property again. "This is not your place, go away." It was clearly aimed at her and her family. The police were unresponsive, and even the local media refused to cover her story. So Tamara reached out to major news outlets, and soon her story was picked up by national channels. The situation was escalating, and Jim, realizing he was losing support, showed up at the rally to apologize. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "I need time to fix things." Tamara was not ready to forgive so easily. "Apologies are just the beginning, Jim," she responded. "You need to understand that this is more than just graffiti. This is part of a system, and you need to confront it." Jim remained silent, unsure of what to say next. After Jim's public apology, the situation grew even more intense. His face appeared on newspaper covers, but not as a hero, rather as a man facing the consequences of his actions. Society began to ask him questions, and local residents, who had previously remained silent, started openly acknowledging the racism in the neighborhood. People approached Tamara, apologizing for their silence and expressing a willingness to support her. As Jim realized his position was getting worse, he tried to justify himself. He continued to apologize, meeting publicly with activists and participating in events. However, his efforts to regain trust seemed insincere. It was clear to everyone that he was trying to save his reputation rather than genuinely repent. Meanwhile, during one of the rallies, an unexpected turn of events occurred. Jim's elderly neighbor, who had lived in the area for many years, publicly stated, "We all stayed silent, but now it's time to act." This confession marked a pivotal moment for the entire community. People began to realize that their silence had helped maintain the status quo. This sparked many to take action. The community united and organized a program on inclusivity and equality. Even Jim, though far from becoming an ideal ally, was involved in the process. He began helping organize events, attempting to atone for his mistake. It was a step forward, though not a perfect one. Watching the changes unfold, Tamara knew that her efforts had not been in vain. While she still could not fully forgive Jim, she saw how his views were starting to change. For her, the victory was not just in exposing Jim, but in how her fight had inspired others to act. The community that had once been silent was now strong and unified in its fight for equality. And although Jim would never be a role model, his changes symbolized the idea that anyone can change if they truly want to. Tamara made her choice. She would continue to fight, knowing that real change begins with each individual.